Thank you very much, Helen Clark, and thank you for your leadership of UNDP. It's a wonderful thing that at the moment, with the Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon, who has a very strong commitment in the field of HIV and AIDS, and also in the field of gender equality and sexuality equality, that the leadership of UNDP and of the United Nations generally, and with Navi Pillay recently laying down her duties as High Commissioner for Human Rights, we just had wonderful people who were allies in the struggle for equality, which is so important for the response to HIV and AIDS. Helen Clark appointed me as a Commissioner of the UNDP Global Commission on HIV and the Law. The chair of the commission was former President Cardoso of Brazil. Another former head of state, the former president of Botswana, was a member of the commission. There were people from civil society like Stephen Lewis from Canada. There was an equal number of women as men on the commission. And Charles Chauvel, on my right here, was a commissioner, and we worked extremely hard. We produced a very user-friendly report, user-friendly in the sense that it tried to avoid jargon, which unfortunately tends to afflict UN reports, but it came straight to the point, and it suggested the urgent need to reform areas of the law which are an impediment to an effective response to HIV and AIDS. Now, most of the chapters of the report deal with vulnerable populations, women and children, prisoners and refugee applicants, men who have sex with men, transgender persons, injecting drug users, sex workers. Everyone in this room knows that these are the specially vulnerable groups to HIV and AIDS. And then the Commission went through the way in which the law is an impediment to reaching out to members of these groups, getting into their minds so that they will, as quickly as possible, secure the HIV test, but also getting into their minds so that they will take steps to follow up and protect themselves and thereby to protect other people in their communities. The report has a very well digested number of recommendations. It doesn't waffle. It's available online. It is succinct, brief, and to the point. And I think during this session we're going to hear about the recommendations of the Commission as it reported to the Administrator and to the United Nations in following up the advice of the Commission has given. The methodology of the Commission was interesting in that we had a number of regional meetings in the various regions of the world and facilitated dialogues with civil society, with scientists, with political leaders and with others, and all of that fed into the process of the consideration by the Commission of what it should recommend. The Commission's report was unanimous, and you won't be surprised to know that in respect of the vulnerable groups, most of the advice was to tell the United Nations and the member countries that the law should get out of the areas that are involved, that there should be decriminalisation involving sex workers, men who have sex with men and issues of sexuality, and drug users. And in respect of other vulnerable groups, there should be support and assistance to them, a provision of protection for them, and the recommendations are set out with useful graphs, technical data, references to the regional meetings, references to individual comments. It's a very user-friendly report, and I would urge you to have a look at it. At the end of the report is Chapter 6, and Chapter 6 may be the least read, but perhaps the most important chapter in the report. It deals with intellectual property. The law on intellectual property is fundamentally derived from international treaties which were adopted during the 19th century. And of course, the universal principles of human rights came with the Charter of the United Nations in 1945, the commitment of the new world body to the principles of human rights, followed quickly in 1948 by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, followed pretty quickly in 1966 by the adoption of the International Covenants on Civil and Political Rights and Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, and all the other great treaties of the United Nations. And in those treaties are provisions for protection of universal health care. And so the fundamental quandary, which is addressed in Chapter 6, a very important part of the report, is that in the international principles of human rights, there is a principle which safeguards the rights of authors of new inventions to appropriate support for and protection of their inventions, so that intellectual property law, international intellectual property law, is itself seen in the UN context as a part of the universal human rights. But it has never been reconciled completely with the principle of the universal access to essential health care. And therefore, the Global Commission on HIV and the Law, in what I believe will be the most important set of recommendations in Chapter 6, said that the United Nations should undertake that reconciliation between the right to health care and the right of authors to the fruits of their inventions. If I can give you an illustration brought out in a report of the Kirby Institute in Sydney concerning the issues of hepatitis C and hepatitis B. There are now drugs available effectively to control and essentially to cure hepatitis C. Those drugs sell in the United States of America because of patents for $84,000 for a 12-week course. They sell by arrangement with the patent holder in India for $2,000 for a 12-week course. They sell in Egypt, which has a very high hepatitis C epidemic because of basically dirty equipment in hospitals, for $600. They cost to produce the actual medication $80. So there it is, $80 to produce the medication, $600 in Egypt, $2,000 in India, $84,000 in the United States of America, and probably roughly that in Australia as well. And in that disparity is the conflict between the right of authors to protection of their health care and the right of pharma to have proper protection so that they will do their work, against the right of individuals with hepatitis C to have access to essential health. And that is the quandary which is addressed in the 6th chapter. Helen Clark, with Navi Pillay and Michel Sidibe, put their signatures to a letter which was sent to the Secretary-General of the United Nations, endorsing the recommendation in 6.1 of the report, urging the establishment of a high-level panel of the United Nations to pick up and take up this new challenge. And we are hopeful that Ban Ki-moon, who has been such a wonderful voice in this area, will establish such a high-level panel to look again at our world in which drugs that cost $80 to make are being sold for $84,000. There is just something disproportionate and wrong in that, even in India. even in India, how many people in India will be able to afford $2,000? Or how many people in Egypt will be able to afford $600? But there's something wrong in the state of Denmark, as was said in Hamlet, and not only in Denmark. It's something wrong in our world, and I congratulate Helen Clark for following up, and Michel Sidibe and Navi Pillay, and I hope that we'll have a little time in this session. People glaze over when you start talking about patents, but patents is a matter of life and death. And it's therefore a very important part of the report. And I know others will speak of the vulnerable communities, and there's a lot in the UNDP report. And I pay a tribute to Mandeep Dhaliwal, to Edmund Settle, who is here, to all the officers of UNDP who made such a difference and produced an excellent report. And we've got to break the logjam and make sure it's followed up and implemented by the UN system and by the nation states that are members of the UN system.
Thank you so much, Michael, particularly for making patent law sound extremely important and interesting.
It's sexy.
That's not easy.
It's sexy. It's important.
It took me back more than 2 decades to when I contributed a chapter to a book on the paradoxes around pharmaceutical companies called For Health or Profit, and the debate is as live today as it was in the early 1990s.